My son Julian believes this story began the night he threw my luggage onto the rain-slicked pavement of his perfect suburban street. He thinks it started when he called me a liability, his voice cutting through the storm like a shard of glass. He's wrong. The story began the moment he looked at me, his own mother, and saw not a person, but a problem to be solved. And my solution, the one that had been quietly germinating in the dark for years, was about to bloom into a beautiful, thorny, and exquisitely painful revenge. He just didn't know he was the one who had just watered the seed. But before I continue, check if you've subscribed to the channel, Agatha Raisin Story, and share in the comments where you are watching us from. We would love to know how far our stories of revenge reach. The thud of my vintage leather suitcase hitting the asphalt was a period at the end of a long, painful sentence. The rain, a relentless, furious downpour, felt less like weather and more like a cosmic judgment. Julian stood, framed in the doorway of the house I'd helped him buy, a monument to his own success. His arms crossed over a chest that no longer held a heart I recognized. His wife Camilla hovered behind him, a pale ghost in cashmere. Her silence, a form of violent agreement. He didn't need to shout anymore. The quiet disgust rolling off him in waves was louder than any screaming match. The unspoken words hung in the drenched air between us. You are no longer welcome. You have no value here. I didn't plead. I didn't cry. A strange, cold calm had settled deep in my bones. I straightened my back, a simple act of defiance against the 72 years that were trying to make me stoop, and picked up the handle of my suitcase. It was already heavy with water, a fitting metaphor for the life I was carrying away from that house. My worn slippers, a comfort just hours ago, made a pathetic squelching sound with each step I took down the driveway and into the storm. I had no coat, no umbrella, just a cardigan that had lost its warmth and its meaning. The front door of the house in Oak Creek Estates slammed shut behind me. That sound, a sharp final crack, echoed in the hollow space that had opened up in my chest. It would stay with me for a long time, not as a sound of rejection, but as the starting gun for the race I was about to run. I walked. I walked until the manicured lawns and identical mailboxes of Julian's neighborhood gave way to the harsh glare of streetlights on a main road. My legs, once strong from years of gardening and chasing a rambunctious boy, ached with a fatigue that was more than physical. I eventually found shelter of a sort, a low concrete retaining wall beneath a highway overpass. It wasn't safe, it wasn't dry, and the air smelled of diesel fumes and damp earth, but it was hidden. It was a place to be invisible, and for the moment, that felt like a strategic advantage. I tucked my soaked suitcase beneath me, a makeshift bench, and leaned my head against the cold, unforgiving concrete. Cars hissed by on the wet road above their tires, spraying water into the darkness. Each splash was a reminder of a world that was moving on without me, a world where people were warm and dry and headed somewhere they belonged. My body ached, a dull throb in my hips and back, but it was nothing compared to the sharp, twisting pain in my heart. My bones felt brittle like old parchment, and my spirit felt like it had been turned to ash. A few people hurried past on the sidewalk, heads down, collars up their faces, illuminated for a fleeting second by the passing headlights. No one gave me a second glance. In their eyes, I was just another forgotten woman, a piece of urban debris. And that was the part that truly terrified me, the ease with which I had been rendered invisible, discarded. I wasn't Adelaide Beaumont anymore, the woman who had managed the budget for a free clinic for 20 years, who had nursed a husband through his final illness with unwavering strength, who had poured every ounce of her being into raising a son. I was a nameless shape huddled under a bridge. Julian's word echoed in my mind, looping endlessly: liability. He'd said it with such casual cruelty, as if I were a line item on a balance sheet that was no longer profitable. As if the scraped knees I'd bandaged, the bedtime stories I'd read, the meals I'd gone without during leaner times, so he could have seconds, had all been erased from the ledger. Now, in his world of calculated assets, I was just dead weight. The wind picked up, slicing through my damp cardigan. I fumbled inside my suitcase and pulled out a thin blanket, already damp and smelling of mothballs. It did little to stop the shaking that racked my body, a tremor born not just of cold, but of a profound, soul-deep humiliation. Perhaps you understand that feeling. The specific, gut-wrenching pain of being looked at by someone you gave everything to, only to see a stranger staring back at you. A stranger who sees you as nothing. I didn't sleep that night. I listened. I listened to the rhythm of the city at its most vulnerable hour. The distant wail of sirens, the rumble of late-night trucks, the sound of something inside of me cracking, breaking apart into 1,000 pieces. But as the pieces fell, they didn't scatter. They began to rearrange themselves into something new, something harder and sharper. Around 3 in the morning, as the relentless rain finally softened to a miserable drizzle, I heard footsteps. They weren't hurried or heavy, but measured, deliberate. I looked up, my eyes gritty from exhaustion, and for a surreal moment, I thought I was hallucinating. A figure emerged from the gloom, silhouetted by the orange glow of a distant streetlight. Beatrice, my younger sister. Her dark hair was plastered to her head. Her mascara had run, but her eyes were the same, fierce, intelligent, and currently blazing with a fury that could have dried the very rain from the sky. We hadn't been close for years. Life, as it does, had gotten in the way. She'd moved to Northern California after her divorce, building a new life for herself in a place I only saw on postcards. Complicated family dynamics, unspoken resentments, and the simple crushing weight of daily existence had created a chasm between us. But there she was, standing before me, like some kind of avenging angel, wrapped in a Burberry trench coat. She didn't speak at first. She just knelt down on the damp ground beside me. Her expensive coat be damned, and brushed the wet matted hair from my face. Her hand came to rest on mine, her skin warm against my icy fingers. It was the first moment of genuine human warmth I had felt in what felt like a lifetime. Without a word, she helped me to my feet. My legs were stiff and unsteady, but she supported me. She picked up my waterlogged suitcase as if it weighed nothing and led me to a sleek, dark rental car parked just down the road. There were no questions. There was no judgment. There was only a silent, profound understanding. I sank into the plush leather of the passenger seat, the heater blasting on full, a thick wool blanket appearing from nowhere to be draped around my shoulders. She handed me a silver thermos. The steam that rose from it smelled of chamomile and honey. I took a sip, the warmth spreading through my chest, chasing away some of the chill that had settled in my soul. It was the first flicker of safety I'd felt since the door of Julian's house had slammed shut. We drove in silence for a long time, leaving the city lights behind us as we merged onto the highway heading north. "You're coming home with me?" she finally said, her voice low but absolute. It wasn't a question or an invitation. It was a decree. I simply nodded, too exhausted and overwhelmed to form a coherent thought. I couldn't imagine going anywhere else. She didn't need to ask what had happened. She had always been able to read me, to see the story written in the slump of my shoulders and the tremor in my hands. Beatrice had always been fire where I was water. She raged when she was wronged. I absorbed, I endured, I survived. But as the miles of dark, empty highway stretched out before us, a question began to form in my mind. Was surviving enough? We stopped at a nondescript motel just outside Sacramento. She handed me a room key and a bag containing a new set of soft, clean clothes. I stood under the scalding spray of the shower for what felt like an hour, scrubbing away the grime, the rain, the humiliation. I stared at my reflection in the fogged-up mirror, at the unfamiliar old woman with haunted eyes who stared back. Then, for the first time in over 24 hours, I slept. It wasn't a deep or peaceful sleep, but it was in a bed, and the door was locked. The next morning, when Beatrice announced we were heading for the coast to her home in a town called Seacliff Point, I didn't ask why. I just followed. Because something inside me had fundamentally shifted during that long, dark night. It wasn't a loud, dramatic change, but a quiet, tectonic turn. It was the moment you realize, with chilling clarity, that you will not let this go. This time, you will not swallow your pain just to keep a semblance of peace. Not when that peace costs you your dignity, your security, your very self. If you have ever been treated like you are disposable by someone you love, if you have ever had to pull yourself up from the ground with nothing but shattered pride and aching bones, then perhaps you will understand what I did next. And I promise you it wasn't pretty, but it was justice. The morning light filtering through the cheap motel curtains felt different. It felt like the beginning of something, not the end. The bed was lumpy. The air conditioning unit hummed a monotonous tune, but compared to the concrete slab under the overpass, it was the Ritz. My muscles protested as I sat up a symphony of aches from the cold and damp, but my hands wrapped around a cup of terrible motel coffee were finally warm. I was no longer in Julian's house, but I was somewhere. I was safe. And that was more than enough to start with. Beatrice was already dressed, moving with the brisk, efficient energy of a general preparing for battle. She didn't bother with small talk about how I'd slept. She just picked up my suitcase, which was miraculously lighter and drier, and said, "Time to move, Addie." I followed her out into the bright, cool air of the Northern California morning. The sky was a vast, unapologetic blue, a stark contrast to the oppressive gray of the previous night. As soon as we were back in the rental car, she put it in drive. No hesitation. 10 minutes down the road, she pulled into a bustling roadside plaza. "Wait here," she commanded, leaving the engine running. She returned a few minutes later with 2 cups of what smelled like real freshly brewed coffee, a warm croissant, and a thick manila folder. She handed me the folder first, her expression unreadable. "Open it." Inside was a professionally printed real estate brochure for a condominium unit in Seacliff Point. 2 bedrooms, a den, and a panoramic view of the Pacific Ocean. It was fully furnished in a style I could only describe as coastal elegance. All clean lines, natural wood, and shades of blue and sand. The price listed at the bottom made my breath catch in my throat. I looked at her, my mouth agape, unable to form a question. She finally spoke again, her eyes fixed on the road ahead as she pulled back onto the highway. "That's yours. I closed on it this morning." I was speechless. My mind simply couldn't process the information. My hands trembled as I held the brochure, the glossy paper feeling alien and unreal. "I wired the funds from a trust I set up for you 15 years ago," she continued, her voice even and matter-of-fact. "It's in your name, Adelaide Beaumont. No mortgage, no liens, no strings attached." I numbly turned the page. There were more photographs. A sleek modern kitchen with quartz countertops and high-end appliances, a guest room with a built-in bookshelf and a writing desk overlooking the sea, a private balcony with 2 comfortable-looking chairs perfectly positioned to watch the sunset. It was the kind of place people dreamed of retiring to, not the kind of place a woman who had spent the night under a bridge was simply given. On the final page, tucked into a clear plastic sleeve, was a bank statement. It showed a deposit made that morning into a newly opened savings account at a local credit union. An account in my name. The amount deposited was $5 million. I looked up from the page, my ears ringing. The number was just sitting there, a string of zeros that seemed to defy all logic. My coffee sat forgotten in the cup holder. Beatrice didn't flinch under my stunned gaze. "Your savings," she said quietly. "Or rather, the inheritance Dad left for both of us. I invested my half. I invested yours too. I never told you because I knew you'd just let Julian talk you out of it, convince you to invest it in one of his harebrained schemes. I knew a day like this might come. Now it has." I leaned back against the headrest, the folder heavy in my lap. A whirlwind of emotions swirled inside me. Shock, confusion, a staggering sense of gratitude, and a sharp, bitter pang of shame. Shame that my own sister had seen this coming when I had been willfully blind. Shame that she had to protect me from my own son. We drove the rest of the way in a thick, loaded silence. I watched the landscape transform from flat farmland to rolling hills dotted with oak trees, and finally to the rugged, dramatic coastline. The air changed, growing cooler, tasting of salt. Beatrice turned off the main highway onto a narrower, winding road lined with ancient cypress trees, their branches twisted into dramatic shapes by the constant ocean wind. We passed through a discreet stone gate. A security guard in a small booth gave Beatrice a familiar wave, and she nodded back. The building was stunning. Not a towering high-rise, but a low, elegant structure of stone and glass that seemed to grow organically from the cliffside. It was painted a soft cream color with deep blue trim that mirrored the ocean below. Beatrice parked in a designated space near the entrance. She retrieved my suitcase from the trunk and led me inside. The lobby was serene and beautiful, smelling faintly of sea salt and cedar. A chic, silver-haired woman at the concierge desk greeted Beatrice by name and handed her a small welcome packet. Beatrice simply gestured toward me. "This is for my sister Adelaide Beaumont. She's the new owner of 3C. The woman's professional smile softened into one of genuine kindness. It was the look of someone who understood discretion, the look of someone who wouldn't ask questions. We rode the silent wood-paneled elevator to the third floor. Beatrice unlocked the door to Unit 3C and pushed it open, stepping aside to let me enter first. The reality was even more breathtaking than the pictures. Sunlight flooded the space, pouring in through a wall of floor-to-ceiling glass doors that led out to the balcony. The sound of the waves crashing on the rocks below was a steady, rhythmic pulse. I walked as if in a trance, straight to the balcony railing, and gripped it, needing something solid to hold on to. The vast, endless expanse of the Pacific Ocean stretched out to the horizon. It was powerful, untamed, and magnificent. Behind me, I heard Beatrice set my suitcase down. "This is your home now, Adelaide," she said, her voice softer than I'd heard it in years. "And I'm in 3A, right across the hall. I'll be here for as long as you need me, so don't get any ideas about disappearing on me." I turned from the view, my hands still gripping the cool metal of the railing. I wanted to thank her to find the words to express the monumental shift she had just orchestrated in my life, but the words felt small and inadequate. So I just nodded, a single slow movement. She walked over to stand beside me, her gaze fixed on the churning water. "I know what he did," she said, her voice hardening again. "I know what they've been doing for years. You don't have to talk about it. Not now, not ever if you don't want to. But you will not let them take anything else from you. Not your name, not your money, and not your peace of mind." She looked me directly in the eye, her fiery spirit blazing. "This place is yours. The money is yours. And I've already spoken to Genevieve." That name jolted me. Genevieve Dubois, Beatrice's old law school roommate. A woman renowned in her field for being brilliant, strategic, and utterly ruthless when it came to protecting her clients. I hadn't seen her in 20 years. "Genevieve is already drafting the necessary documents," Beatrice continued. "Ironclad trusts, financial firewalls, legal shields. Anything they might try to come after will be locked down so tight, it would take an act of God to pry it loose. We will be 2, 3, 10 steps ahead of them." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My fingers slowly unclenched from the railing. Beatrice's voice dropped to a near whisper. "You are not a guest here, Addie. You are not dependent on anyone's charity. You are the owner of this property. You are a woman of independent means, and you need to start acting like it." She gave my shoulder a firm squeeze, and then left, closing the door softly behind her. I stood on that balcony for a long, long time, watching the endless motion of the tide. The ocean didn't stop, and neither did the thoughts churning in my head. Julian and Camilla thought they had buried me. They thought shame and fear would keep me silent, that I would wither away quietly in some state-run facility. They had no idea that I wasn't buried. I had been planted, and I was about to grow into something they would never see coming. 3 days after I moved into my new life, Beatrice organized a small welcome to the community gathering. It wasn't a question. She simply sent me a text message with the time and a gentle instruction to wear the new silk tunic she'd left in my closet. The event was held in the building's clubhouse, an elegant space with a fireplace, comfortable seating, and a wall of windows overlooking the ocean. About a dozen people were there, mostly other residents, retired professionals, a charming artist, a few other widows, who, I would soon learn, had their own stories of resilience. I felt a tremor of my old anxiety, the instinct to shrink, to make myself small. But then I caught my reflection in the glass, the deep sapphire blue of the tunic Beatrice had chosen for me, and I stood a little taller. Beatrice, ever the protector, stayed close, introducing me simply as my sister Adelaide, who has come to Seacliff Point for a fresh start. The introductions were warm and blessedly superficial. No one asked probing questions. There was an unspoken understanding among this demographic that everyone had a past, and politeness dictated you let them share it on their own terms. As Beatrice mingled, I found a quiet corner by the window, content to watch the evening light paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Safety was a novel feeling, and I was still getting used to it. The simple act of being in a room of strangers without feeling the need to justify my existence felt like a profound luxury. That sense of peace was shattered when the building's head of security, a distinguished-looking man named Arthur, paused his patrol to step inside. He was in his late 60s, with kind eyes and the sturdy build of a man who had seen a thing or two. He did a slow scan of the room, his gaze briefly landing on me. He walked over, a polite smile on his face. "Evening, ma'am," he said, his voice a pleasant baritone. He glanced at the small name tag I wore. "Unit 3C. You're across from Ms. Beatrice, then?" I confirmed that I was. "She's a sharp one." He chuckled. "Doesn't miss a trick. You've got a good person looking out for you." He then lowered his voice slightly. "Just a heads up. We had a report of a non-resident vehicle circling the guest parking lot late last night. A newer model silver sedan. The driver seemed to be paying a lot of attention to the lobby entrance. Probably nothing, but we're keeping an eye on things." A cold knot formed in my stomach. A silver sedan. The same make and model as Julian's. I thanked Arthur for the information, making a mental note to tell Beatrice, though I suspected she already knew. A few minutes later, Beatrice tapped a spoon against her wine glass, calling for everyone's attention. She gave a short, elegant toast. "To new beginnings," she said, her eyes finding mine across the room, "and to second chances, which are always worth celebrating." As the polite applause faded, I saw Beatrice's gaze flick towards the clubhouse entrance. Her expression tightened infinitesimally. I followed her line of sight, and my heart plummeted. There they were, Julian and Camilla, standing just inside the doorway, as if they had every right to be there. He was wearing a freshly pressed shirt, the kind he only wore when he wanted to impress someone. Camilla was a vision in beige and gold, her hair perfectly coiffed, a strained but polite smile plastered on her face. They looked like the perfect, concerned family. My stomach clenched so hard I thought I might be sick. Beatrice, however, didn't miss a beat. She moved toward them with the grace of a panther, intercepting them before they could take another step into the room. I couldn't hear her words, but her posture, the set of her jaw, communicated a clear and icy message. "You are not welcome here." She didn't raise her voice, didn't cause a scene, but she was an immovable barrier. Julian tried to look over her shoulder at me, his face arranged into an expression of loving concern. It was a masterful performance, as if the last time he'd seen me wasn't in a torrential downpour, as if his voice hadn't been dripping with contempt. I stood frozen, my hand gripping the edge of a marble-topped table so hard my knuckles turned white. Beatrice subtly motioned to Arthur, who appeared at her side in an instant. The conversation was brief and quiet. Julian and Camilla held their ground for a moment longer, their smiles faltering, then turned and walked out. Camilla didn't even bother to glance in my direction. The other residents, sensing a private drama, tactfully turned their attention back to their conversations. Beatrice returned to my side, plucked a strawberry from a nearby tray, and said calmly, I told you they'd come. She had warned me that morning. One of Camilla's friends on social media had posted about a spontaneous weekend trip up the coast, a post that was just a little too geographically specific to be a coincidence. Beatrice was always 3 moves ahead. After the gathering wound down, she walked me back to my apartment. At my door, she simply said, "Lock this." I went inside and did as she said, then leaned against the cool wood of the door, my heart still hammering against my ribs. They hadn't come to apologize. They had come on a reconnaissance mission. They had come to assess the new terrain to see what they were up against. But now they knew. I was not the broken woman they had left shivering under a bridge. I was here in this beautiful, secure place, and I was no longer alone. Still, the encounter left me shaken. The feeling of safety was fragile. So I did something I hadn't done in decades. I went to the writing desk in the guest room, the one with the perfect view of the ocean. Beatrice had stocked it with beautiful thick paper and a heavy, elegant fountain pen. I opened a fresh notebook, the crisp scent of the paper filling the air. I uncapped the pen, its cool metal, a comforting weight in my hand. And across the top of the first page in clear, steady script, I wrote a single sentence. "What they took from me, they will return." Then I drew a firm line beneath it and wrote 3 words. Each one a pillar of my new resolve: house, name, power. The party was over. The curtain had risen on a new act. They had walked onto the stage, thinking they were still the directors of this play. But I was the one holding the pen now. And I was going to write an ending they would never forget. Beatrice, true to her word, did not waste a moment. 2 days after their failed infiltration of the welcome party, she was at my door at 10 o'clock sharp. She carried a leather portfolio in one hand and her sleek tablet in the other. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant chignon, and the look on her face told me we were officially moving from the defensive to the offensive. She spread a series of documents across my large kitchen island. "They're going to try again," she stated, her voice devoid of emotion. "But this time, it won't be a charm offensive. It will be a legal one." I watched as she laid out the pages. They were a collection of emails, screenshots of text messages, and digital breadcrumbs left by Julian and Camilla. Beatrice had, without my knowledge, engaged a discreet private investigator to monitor any financial or legal inquiries made in my name. The findings were subtle, but the pattern was undeniable. Julian had made inquiries with a small out-of-state law firm specializing in elder asset management, asking about power of attorney transfers. Camilla had been messaging a mobile notary on a local networking site. Beatrice tapped a printed email. "They're going to come at you with official-looking documents probably delivered in person. They'll put on a performance tears apologies. Concern for your well-being. They're counting on you being too soft-hearted or too intimidated to refuse to sign something if they come at you with a sob story." She looked at me, then her gaze intense. "I need you to be ready. I need you to follow the plan exactly." I didn't hesitate. "Yes," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. The last vestiges of the timid, accommodating woman I had been were burning away, replaced by a cold, clear resolve. This wasn't a family squabble anymore. This was a siege. Julian and Camilla didn't want to help me. They wanted to control what they believed I no longer had the capacity or the right to manage. That afternoon, we set the stage. I invited a few of my new neighbors over for coffee and pastries, the lovely artist from the 5th floor, and the retired couple from down the hall. We created a casual social atmosphere, just enough people to serve as unwitting witnesses. Beatrice had a quiet word with the concierge, instructing him to allow Julian and Camilla up to my apartment if they arrived. She didn't invite them, of course, but she made sure the door was open for them to walk into the trap. Then she discreetly placed a tiny, high-fidelity audio recorder under the lip of the end table next to the sofa, activated it, and sat down with a cup of tea, as if we were simply enjoying a pleasant afternoon. It didn't take long. Less than half an hour later, there was a knock at the door. Beatrice didn't even flinch. I took a deep breath, smoothed down my tunic, and opened it. Julian stood there, his face a mask of remorseful affection. Camilla was just behind him, clutching a designer gift bag from which gold tissue paper elegantly overflowed. She was dressed in pale angelic white. They had rehearsed this. Julian stepped inside his greetings loud and jovial, making a joke about just dropping by since they were in the area, 100-mile drive from their home. Marissa placed the gift bag on the table, pulling out a tin of what she claimed were homemade shortbread cookies. I offered a cool, polite, "Thank you." Beatrice watched them from her armchair, her expression as placid and dangerous as a sleeping tiger. After 5 minutes of excruciatingly shallow small talk, Julian leaned forward, his hands clasped earnestly. "Mom," he began, his voice thick with faux sincerity, "I brought something I was hoping you'd look at." He reached into his briefcase and produced a professionally bound document. The cover page read, in bold, imposing letters, "Family Wellness and Property Agreement." Beatrice took one look at the title and elegantly crossed her legs, a small knowing smile playing on her lips. Paul slid the document across the coffee table toward me. "It's just something to help us streamline things." He explained, his words smooth and practiced. "So we can help out with coordinating medical appointments, ease the process if anything urgent comes up. It's for your protection." He held his smile a little too long. I picked up the document. It was 6 pages long, filled with dense legal jargon. I read it silently, my outward expression calm, while my heart hammered against my ribs. Buried on page 4, in a paragraph innocuously labeled "Temporary Authorization," was a clause granting him durable power of attorney. A little further down, a section titled "Financial Oversight" gave him the authority to access and manage all of my bank accounts under a joint access provision. It was a complete financial takeover gift, wrapped in the language of love and concern. I placed the document back on the table. I didn't say a word. The artist and the retired couple were now watching, their polite chatter having died down, sensing the shift in the room's atmosphere. Then Beatrice stood up. She walked to the kitchen counter where her leather portfolio lay and retrieved a second folder. From it, she produced a document that was nearly identical to the one Julian had brought. "This," she said, her voice cutting through the silence, "is a copy of the draft you commissioned last week from that paralegal service in Fresno." She addressed Julian directly, her tone icy. "The original email request is time-stamped. The language is, of course, word for word." Julian's face froze. The color drained from his cheeks. Camilla's hand flew to her pearls, her mask of serenity shattering. Beatrice turned to me. "Go ahead, Adelaide. Ask them what this document is really for." I didn't need to. The shocked, guilty silence in the room was more damning than any confession. My neighbors stared, their expressions a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. Beatrice then picked up her tablet from the end table, tapped the screen, and the crisp, clear audio of our entire conversation began to play back into the room, starting with Julian's jovial greeting at the door. She let it run for a few seconds before stopping it. Then she raised her voice just enough to be clearly heard by everyone present. "I want everyone in this room to understand," she announced, "that this document was designed to strip my sister of her financial autonomy under the guise of family assistance. This is what elder manipulation looks like. It comes with a smile and a tin of cookies." Julian shot to his feet, his face now red with fury and embarrassment. "You have no idea what you're talking about. We're just trying to help." Marissa grabbed his arm, trying to pull him toward the door, but it was too late. Beatrice laughed, a single sharp, mirthless sound. "A scene, no, Julian. This isn't a scene, this is clarity." She looked at me and gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. It was my cue. I rose from my chair, walked calmly to the coffee table, picked up the Family Wellness and Property Agreement they had brought, and with slow, deliberate movements, I tore it in half. Then I tore the halves into quarters. The sound of the ripping paper was the only sound in the now silent room. My neighbors stared wide-eyed. Julian looked at me, and for the first time I saw genuine fear in his eyes. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't curse or cry. I simply held up the torn pieces of the document and said, my voice low, but carrying to every corner of the room, "This is what happens when you mistake a woman's quiet dignity for weakness." Beatrice gestured coolly toward the open door. Julian and Camilla practically fled this time without a single backward glance. I sat back down, my hands still holding the scraps of paper. They felt warm. Beatrice brought me a glass of water. A few moments later, my neighbors, murmuring polite excuses, quietly let themselves out. When the room was finally empty, Beatrice spoke. "They'll try something else," she said, her voice grim. I nodded. I knew she was right. But what Julian and Camilla didn't know was that we were no longer just defending. We were building a case, and I was ready to take back everything they had ever tried to diminish piece by piece, lie by lie. The war had just begun. 3 mornings after the disastrous and deeply satisfying contract tearing incident, I opened my front door to retrieve the morning paper and found a single perfect white orchid sitting on my welcome mat. There was no card, no note. It was a silent, cowardly apology, an attempt at peace that didn't have the courage to actually speak. I stared at it for a long moment. It was a beautiful plant, but it felt sinister, like a wreath laid at a gravesite. Across the hall, Beatrice's door opened. She emerged, coffee cup in hand, took one look at the orchid, and said without blinking, "They're switching tactics, from legal force to emotional manipulation." I nodded, stepped back inside without touching the plant, and locked my door. I left the orchid in the hallway to wither. That evening they tried again. This time it was Julian alone. He showed up around dinner time wearing a polo shirt I'd bought him years ago for a job interview he'd flaked on. His smile was softer, his eyes full of practiced sadness. He was carrying a paper bag from a well-known local Italian restaurant. "Figured you might not have felt like cooking," he said through the closed screen door. I didn't open it. He stood on my doorstep for what felt like an eternity, making small talk with the door. He told me I looked well. He asked if I was settling into the neighborhood. He said that he and Camilla had been talking, that they felt just awful about how things had escalated, how misunderstood they had been. He said he missed me. His voice was a carefully modulated instrument of persuasion. I remained silent, a statue behind the screen. Eventually, his performance wound down. He left the bag of food on the small bench outside my door and walked away. I watched him go, unmoved. The food I knew was not nourishment. It was a Trojan horse. The next morning, it was Camilla's turn. She arrived just before noon, carrying a bag of expensive organic groceries and a best-selling novel tucked under her arm. Her tone was light breezy, as if this were a normal, casual visit. She didn't mention the party, the contract, or the torn paper. She just wanted to stop by, see if I needed any errands run, maybe cook me a healthy lunch. She used to call me Adelaide. That day, she called me Mom. I watched her through the peephole, a silent observer of her one-woman play, until she finally gave up and left. She took the groceries with her. A week passed in this manner. A relentless, soft siege. One of them would appear, then the other. Sometimes with food, sometimes with flowers. Once Julian left a framed photograph of himself as a little boy proudly holding a fish he'd caught with my arm around him. It was a memory they were attempting to weaponize. I never responded, but I watched. And I recorded. Beatrice had provided me with a small, discreet recording device, no bigger than a thumb drive, that I kept near the door. It was voice-activated. I wasn't trying to catch them in a criminal act. I was documenting the pattern. The tone, the calculated pauses, the way every conversation, no matter how it started, eventually circled back to my well-being, my finances, my affairs. The language was always couched in concern, but the subtext was clear. It wasn't about repair. It was about regaining access. Beatrice took the audio files and had them transcribed, sharing them with Genevieve. Our lawyer didn't react with emotion. She simply listened, took meticulous notes, and asked pointed questions about my mail, my email accounts, my phone calls. And then she flagged something. A soft credit inquiry had revealed that Julian had attempted to submit a change of address request for my primary bank account correspondence. He had tried to have my statements redirected to his home. He'd done it online using an old security question he still knew the answer to. The bank's fraud department had flagged the unusual request and blocked it, but it was a clear, undeniable escalation. It was an attempt at identity theft. Beatrice had the locks on my physical mailbox changed the very next day. The night after that, the fire alarm on my floor was pulled around 2 a.m. The entire wing was evacuated. There was no fire, of course. Arthur, the head of security, reviewed the surveillance footage. He found a blurry figure in a dark hooded jacket slipping into a service corridor 20 minutes before the alarm was pulled. He couldn't see a face, but the jacket was identical to the one Julian had been wearing at the welcome party. It was a tactic of harassment designed to destabilize me, to make me seem frail and unable to cope. I asked Beatrice to call Genevieve again. The following day, our lawyer came to my apartment with her laptop. She spent 2 hours with me, methodically walking me through how to secure my entire digital life. We set up 2-factor authentication on every account, changed every password, and instituted secure digital alerts that would notify both her and Beatrice of any access attempt, any login from an unrecognized device, any file request tied to my name or social security number. I agreed to everything a willing student in the art of modern self-defense. When we were finished, I asked Genevieve if she thought they were done. She closed her laptop, her expression serious. "No," she said. "They've tried the front door with charm and the side door with legal pressure. Now they'll try the back door. They'll go after your reputation." I asked what she meant. "They'll start trying to build a narrative that you're incompetent," she explained. "They'll try to make you look unstable, disorganized, vulnerable. If they can't get you to sign over control, they'll try to have it stripped from you by the state." 2 days later, her prediction came true. A polite, well-dressed man in his 40s knocked on my door. He claimed to be from a senior wellness advocacy group. He said my family had requested a complimentary wellness check and estate plan review, just to make sure everything was in order for my golden years. He smiled a practiced, reassuring smile, as if it were perfectly normal for strangers with clipboards to show up unannounced at the homes of women in their 70s. "I already have a legal team, thank you," I said firmly, and closed the door in his face. He left quickly. Genevieve filed a formal complaint that same afternoon with the state's Office for Professional Guardianship. It wasn't a lawsuit, just a preemptive strike. It created a paper trail, a formal record of their escalating harassment. I knew exactly what they were doing. They were trying to create a series of incidents they could later point to as evidence of my decline. That night, alone in the quiet of my beautiful apartment, I didn't feel scared. I felt a cold, clarifying anger. I took out the deed to my condominium and my new bank statements. I ran my fingers over my name printed in official, undeniable black ink. Adelaide Beaumont. I whispered it aloud, not for dramatic effect, but to remind myself of who I was. I was not a confused old woman. I was the owner of this life, and I would not allow anyone to declare me incompetent to live it. The doorbell rang one more time that week. It was Julian again, holding a bottle of expensive red wine. Camilla waited by the elevators, a silent, lurking presence. He didn't ask to come in this time. He just wanted to talk. He said things had gotten out of hand. He said families should stick together. He said perhaps we could just talk about some practical things for my own good. I didn't open the door. I spoke through the wood, my voice steady and clear. "Do not come back here, Julian." His voice on the other side of the door cracked, not with sadness, but with a flash of the rage I knew so well, thinly veiled as confusion. I didn't respond. I just waited in silence until I heard his footsteps retreat down the hall. Then I went back to my kitchen table, took out my notebook, and made a new entry. It was a list divided into 3 columns. What they tried. What failed. What will never be forgiven. I was no longer on the defensive. I was building an arsenal of truth, The storm had passed, but the evidence of the damage it had tried to inflict would be my shield and my sword, and I would be the one to carry it into the final battle. The invitation, when it came, was a masterpiece of manipulative diplomacy. It arrived via text message from Julian, a medium he knew I found impersonal and difficult. The message was short, polite, and laden with emotional blackmail. He asked if I would be willing to come to their house for Sunday dinner. He said the children missed their grandmother. He said he and Camilla just wanted to start fresh. He ended with a line about the importance of family and forgiveness that was so cloying it almost made me gag. I stared at the phone for a long time. I knew exactly what this was. It was the final act of their play. Beatrice knew it. Genevieve had predicted it with uncanny accuracy. Their attempts at legal pressure had failed. The backdoor competency attacks had been documented and rebuffed. The campaign of emotional harassment had been met with a wall of silence. So now came the last resort, the full-court press of family sentimentality staged on their home turf. I typed back a simple reply: I will be there at 6. On Sunday, I chose my armor carefully. A simple, elegant navy blue dress with a high collar and long sleeves. It was modest, dignified, and projected an aura of unshakable calm. I pinned my silver hair back in a neat twist and wore the simple gold watch my late husband Charles had given me for our 25th anniversary. It was a reminder of a time when family meant loyalty and love, not strategy and deceit. I carried a slim clutch bag. Inside, nestled next to my lipstick, was a single sealed envelope. Their house hadn't changed. It was still a monument to beige, suburban perfection. Fresh mulch in the flower beds, a new seasonal wreath on the door. It was all a facade, a desperate attempt to project an image of wholesomeness that couldn't mask the bitterness seeping from the very walls. Camilla greeted me at the door. Her smile stretched so wide, it looked painful. Her eyes, however, were cold and calculating, flicking over my attire, trying to read my intentions. She placed a hand on the small of my back to guide me inside, a gesture that was meant to seem welcoming, but felt proprietary and controlling. The dining table was set for a formal meal, complete with their best china and silverware. Paul sat at the head of the table, playing the role of benevolent patriarch. The children, looking uncomfortable in their starchy Sunday best, sat silently, their eyes darting nervously between me and their parents. They were old enough to sense the tension, even if they didn't understand its source. We sat, we ate. The food was, of course, delicious. Camilla was an excellent cook, a skill she often used as both a tool and a weapon. The conversation was a minefield of forced pleasantries. They talked about the children's school achievements, about a potential promotion for Julian at his firm. Camilla complimented her own roast chicken, twice her tone fishing for the praise I was careful not to give. I remained polite, reserved, a placid guest. I did not bring up the events of the past few months, and for a while, neither did they. But then, as dessert was being served, Julian leaned back in his chair, affecting a world-weary sigh. "You know, Mom, I've been doing a lot of thinking lately," he began, his voice dripping with contrived sincerity, "about how complicated things have gotten between us. And I know we've all made mistakes, but I just hate this distance." Camilla reached across the table to place her hand on his, a perfectly timed gesture of support. "And with the kids getting older," she added, her voice soft and concerned, "we just don't want them to have any regrets. We want them to know what a real close-knit family looks like." It was a masterful performance of tag-team manipulation. I let the silence hang for a moment, then gave a small non-committal nod. "I appreciate the sentiment," I said, my voice neutral. They both smiled, visibly relaxing, believing they had found a crack in my armor. And then Julian went in for the kill. "I was wondering, Mom," he said, his tone casual, "if maybe when things have settled down we could talk. You know, review some of the decisions that were made when things were so tense, especially regarding some of your estate matters, just to make sure you're protected." There it was. The velvet glove pulled off the grasping hand beneath it revealed. I held their gaze, my expression unreadable. Then I reached into my clutch bag and retrieved the slim envelope. "Of course we can talk about the future," I said, my voice calm and clear. "In fact, I think it's best if we're all perfectly clear on the matter." So I had something drawn up. I slid the envelope across the polished surface of the dining table. It came to a stop directly in front of Julian. Camilla's fingers, which had been resting on his hand, twitched. Julian picked it up. His confident smile faltered as he felt the formal weight of the paper inside. He opened it. What he found was not a letter, but a legally binding notarized addendum to my will and estate plan. It outlined in painstaking and irrevocable detail the establishment of the Adelaide Beaumont Foundation, the nonprofit organization I had quietly formed weeks ago, with Genevieve's expert guidance. It confirmed that my condominium in Seacliff Point, my savings and investment accounts, my trust fund, everything was now legally and permanently deeded to the foundation. It then listed the foundation's sole beneficiaries, a scholarship program for single mothers over the age of 60 who were returning to school, a grant fund for community-based elder abuse prevention programs, and a medical outreach initiative for underserved rural communities named in honor of my late husband. Julian's face went rigid. The blood drained from it, leaving behind a pasty, shocked pallor. Camilla's carefully constructed smile didn't just crack, it shattered. "You see," I said gently, my voice resonating in the stunned silence of the room, "I've been thinking about this a great deal as well. And I've realized that I do not want to spend the rest of my life worrying about who feels they deserve a slice of a pie they did nothing to help bake." Julian swallowed hard. I could see the rage building behind his eyes, a storm of thwarted greed. He was struggling to maintain his composure in front of his children. "I am not cutting you out of my life." I continued, my voice still soft, but now edged with steel. "But I am choosing peace. I am choosing clarity. And I am choosing to protect my legacy from those who would seek to control it." No one spoke. The children were frozen, their eyes wide, sensing that something monumental and terrible had just occurred. I slowly rose from my chair, placing my napkin neatly beside my plate. "Dinner was lovely," I said to the room at large. "Thank you for the invitation." Camilla opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She looked utterly defeated. At the front door, Julian followed me. "Is this it then?" he asked, his voice a low, choked whisper. "This is your final move." I didn't stop walking. "Mom," he said again, his voice louder now, sharper, the mask of the concerned son finally falling away to reveal the angry, entitled man beneath. We were trying to make things right. I turned back at the threshold, my hand on the doorknob. "No, Julian," I said, my voice devoid of all emotion. "You were trying to regain access, but what you truly lost was my trust. And that is not something I hand out like dessert at a family dinner." I walked out, closing the door softly behind me. Back in my car parked on their perfect street, I took a deep, shuddering breath. It was done. There had been no screaming match, no dramatic courtroom showdown, just the quiet, indisputable power of the truth, documented, signed, sealed, and delivered. They had underestimated me. Not just as a mother, a widow, or an old woman. They had underestimated my intelligence, my memory, and my capacity to plan for a war they had started. And that night, for the first time in years, I slept soundly without double-locking my door. They couldn't reach me anymore. Not through legal loopholes, not through emotional manipulation, and not through my legacy. I was finally truly free. 3 days after the dinner that redrew the map of our family, I was awakened by the sound of tires crunching on the gravel of the guest parking area. I moved to my window, peering through a slit in the curtains. Julian's silver sedan sat there gleaming under the early morning sun. He remained in the driver's seat for a long time, then got out and began to pace, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. The morning fog was still clinging to the cypress trees, muffling the sound of the ocean. It felt like a scene from a dream. I didn't go to the door. I simply watched. He knocked once, a sharp, angry rap. Then, after a long pause, he knocked again. Softer this time, hesitant. He waited. Then he turned and left. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. The message was from him. His voice was strained, unnaturally calm. He said he respected my choice. He said he and Camilla would give me space. He said they understood where I stood now. It was a carefully worded retreat, an attempt to reframe his defeat as a mutual decision, but I knew better. By that afternoon, Beatrice called her voice tight with a grim satisfaction. "It started," she said. "I just got a call from a contact at the county clerk's office. A new motion was filed this morning. Julian and Camilla were once again attempting to contest my mental fitness. But this time, their angle was different. They were using the very existence of my foundation as proof that I was being manipulated. Their claim was that I, a frail and vulnerable woman, had been financially exploited by outside influences, namely Beatrice and Genevieve, and coerced into signing away my assets. They argued that no one in their right mind would give their entire fortune to charity instead of their own loving family. I didn't flinch. Beatrice asked if I wanted Genevieve to file an immediate response. "No," I told her, "not yet." Because I had learned a crucial lesson from this ordeal. Sometimes the most powerful move is to wait. You let your opponents overplay their hand. You give them enough rope, and they will invariably hang themselves. The next morning, I drove into the charming little town of Seacliff Point. I didn't go to a lawyer's office. I went to a small family-owned bakery called The Rolling Pin. The owner, a woman named Jackie, who was a good 5 years my senior and walked with an elegant silver-topped cane, greeted me with a warm smile. We had spoken a few times before about the community grants my foundation was planning to offer. I sat down with her over a cup of tea and told her I had a proposition. That afternoon, we were printing flyers. By the next day, posters were hanging in the local library, the senior center, the medical clinics, and the women's shelter. The Adelaide Beaumont Foundation announces community outreach days, free workshops on financial literacy for seniors, free legal consultations for women looking to protect their estates, hot meals and companionship for those living in isolation. The main event was held at the Town Hall, a beautiful historic building just 2 blocks from the real estate office, where Camilla's father was a senior partner. Over 200 people from the community showed up. By the end of the week, the story of the foundation was in the local newspaper. A week after that, it was picked up by a regional blog focused on elder rights and advocacy. I remained silent through it all. I didn't need to give interviews. The work spoke for itself. My visibility became my shield. On Friday, Genevieve dropped by my apartment. She had heard through her network that Julian and Camilla had retained a new lawyer, a notoriously aggressive litigator known for his courtroom theatrics. "They're not backing down, Adelaide," she warned me. "They're doubling down." I smiled. "I know." Then I handed her a new set of documents. They weren't for me. They were for the newly appointed board of directors of my foundation, a carefully selected group of respected community leaders, financial experts, and nonprofit professionals. None of them were family. All of them were formidable. The documents enacted a final, brilliant failsafe. I had signed over my personal name and likeness rights to the Foundation's protection clause. This meant that no matter what accusations of incompetence were leveled against me personally, the Foundation's assets could not be liquidated, transferred, or touched in any way without a unanimous vote from the full board. Genevieve's eyes widened as she read the clause. "My God, Adelaide," she whispered, "you've sealed every possible door and window." I simply nodded. "Let them knock," I said. "They're only proving my point for me." On Sunday, my doorbell rang again. This time, it was a surprise. It was Olivia, my former daughter-in-law, Julian's first wife. A woman I had once loved, like my own daughter before Julian, had unceremoniously left her for the wealthier, more socially connected Camilla. She was holding a cheap bouquet of supermarket flowers, her eyes soft and apologetic. But I had learned to be wary of softness. It could be a weapon just like rage. I let her in. She looked around my beautiful living room, her expression a mixture of awe and sadness. "I didn't know they were filing again," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I swear, Adelaide, I just want all of this to go back to the way it was." She paused, then delivered the line I knew was coming. "If there's anything I need to sign to show my support for you, anything to put this all behind us, I'll do it." And there it was. She hadn't come for a reconciliation. She had been sent by Julian as a scout, a final attempt to gauge my resolve to see if there was any lingering family sentiment he could exploit. I stood up and she followed suit, her face a mask of concern. "I know what you're doing, Olivia," I said, my voice calm and devoid of accusation. "And I want you to take a message back to Julian for me. This house, this peace, this life, I built it. After everything he threw at me, I survived. And I did it while he was loudly trying to destroy me." Her face fell. The act was over. "He's falling apart, Adelaide," she whispered, her voice cracking. "He's not sleeping. He's losing clients at his firm. He's blaming Camilla. He's blaming me. He's blaming everyone but himself. I'm scared of what he'll do." I looked at her, at this woman, who had also been a victim of my son's ambition and cruelty, and I felt a flicker of the old sympathy, but it was just a flicker. "That," I said, not unkindly, but with absolute finality, "is no longer my burden to carry." She left without another word. That night, I opened the sliding glass door to the balcony and let the cool, salty air fill my apartment. I listened to the sound of the ocean, a sound that had become my companion. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I didn't feel like I was bracing for the next blow. I felt finished. Not defeated, but complete. There is a moment after the storm has passed when the silence that returns is not empty. It is earned. By Monday morning, the atmosphere had changed. There was a palpable tension in the air, the quiet before a final decisive battle. Vivian called just after noon, her voice ablade. "The court date's been set," she said. "They pushed for an expedited hearing. They're feeling confident. But they made a mistake, Addie. A colossal one." I waited, holding my breath. "They submitted their evidence package to the court," she continued. "Financial records letters, their fabricated timeline of your decline. And," she paused, letting the weight of her next words land, "they forged your signature." I sat down very still. She explained. The documents Julian and Camilla had filed included a forged amendment to the Foundation's Charter 1 that granted Julian co-signing authority and the power to appoint board members. It was audacious, reckless, and breathtakingly stupid. They had invented an entire board meeting complete with falsified minutes and had it notarized. Vivian had already sent the documents to a forensic handwriting expert, but she hadn't stopped there. She'd also had a discreet lunch with the notary, whose name and seal were on the fraudulent document. The man, it turned out, had no memory of the meeting, no memory of me, and his personal logs showed he had been out of the state on the date in question. His seal had been stolen or digitally forged. That wasn't just a crack in their case. It was a chasm. By Wednesday, the forensic examiner's report was complete. Not only was the signature on the amendment a demonstrable forgery, but the metadata embedded in the PDF files they had submitted to the court revealed the documents had been created and sloppily backdated just 3 days prior. One document was supposedly signed during a meeting at a local cafe that a quick search revealed had been closed for renovations for the past month. They hadn't just been criminals, they had been lazy criminals. That's when Genevieve made her move. She filed a motion to dismiss, along with a countermotion for sanctions, citing fraud upon the court and perjury. She submitted the forensic report, a sworn affidavit from the notary, and statements from every single one of my foundation's board members. It was no longer a defense. It was a counter-assault. And then it got worse for them. A day later, the county district attorney's office reached out to Genevieve. As it turns out, attempting to defraud a registered nonprofit, especially one dedicated to elder welfare, isn't just a civil matter. It can be a felony. An automatic criminal review had been triggered the moment Genevieve filed her motion. The state was now interested. Throughout all of this, I remained quiet. I tended to my balcony garden. I baked bread. I took long walks on the beach every morning. But inside, I felt a profound shift. It wasn't about anger anymore or even justice. It was about the simple, irrefutable power of the truth. They had drawn a line, crossed it, and now the entire world would see. The hearing was scheduled for Thursday morning. I arrived early with Beatrice and Genevieve. The courtroom was a cold, sterile place, all polished wood and bad lighting. Julian and Marissa sat 3 rows ahead of us with their expensive theatrical lawyer. Neither of them looked back. The judge, a stern, no-nonsense woman in her 60s, was swift. She reviewed the evidence in silence. Genevieve, calm and composed, laid out our case with surgical precision. She didn't need to raise her voice. The forensics, the notary's affidavit, the impossible timelines, the evidence spoke for itself. When it was their lawyer's turn, he fumbled. He tried to claim I had given verbal authorization, that I was suffering from memory lapses, that I had simply misunderstood the documents. In a truly baffling move, he submitted the very same cognitive evaluation report I had taken weeks ago, the one showing I was in perfect mental health, as evidence that I had the capacity to make such decisions. He had in writing contradicted his own primary argument that I was incompetent. The judge called for a brief recess. Outside on the courthouse steps, I stood blinking in the harsh sunlight while Genevieve spoke with a representative from the DA's office. The warmth of the sun on my head felt good. A small, simple pleasure in a complicated world. Then I heard his voice. "Mom?" I turned. Julian was walking toward me alone. His face was drawn and pale, his usual arrogance replaced by a desperate, hollow look. "You're really going to do this?" he said. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. I looked at him, at the face of the boy I had raised, now a stranger. "No, Julian," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "You did this." His shoulders slumped. It was as if for the very first time he understood that he couldn't shift the blame, that this was a mess of his own making. "I didn't think it would go this far," he muttered, his eyes on the pavement. I nodded slowly. "That's the thing about crossing lines, Julian. Once you're on the other side, you don't get to decide where the road ends." He looked like he wanted to say more, but Beatrice stepped up beside me, then a silent, formidable guardian. "We should head back inside," she said. When the judge returned to the bench, she did not waste any time. "Motion to dismiss is granted," she announced, her voice ringing with authority. The forged documents were stricken from the record. The Foundation's charter was secure. A formal referral of the entire matter had been made to the district attorney's office for criminal investigation into felony fraud and forgery, and with the sharp rap of her gavel, it was over. But for me, it was something deeper than a legal victory. I had stood in a system that so often dismisses women like me, that assumes we are frail, confused, or overly emotional, and I had been heard. I didn't win because I was the loudest. I won because I was meticulous. I kept my records. I told the truth, and I trusted that their lies would eventually collapse under their own weight. That evening, I sat on my balcony with Beatrice and Genevieve. We ate peach pie and drank champagne, and we didn't talk about what had happened. We didn't need to. The truth had finally spoken for all of us, and for the first time in a very long time, it had been enough. 2 days after the verdict, I walked through my small balcony garden, a pair of shears in my hand. The autumn air was crisp, and the late afternoon sun cast long golden shadows. The lavender bushes I had planted were overgrown, and I began to clip them back bundle by bundle, the familiar calming scent filling the quiet space around me. It has always been my way of coming back to myself through the steady, ordinary rhythm of tending to living things. Beatrice had called that morning. Her voice was different, lighter. "The DA's office is moving forward," she'd said. "Formal charges are being filed. 3 counts: fraud, forgery, and attempted misappropriation of nonprofit assets." I had thanked her, but felt no triumphant surge of joy, no vindictive pleasure. There was only the quiet, heavy finality of a chapter closing. This was never a quest for revenge. It was a demand for the truth to be seen. Julian never called. Not a text, not an email, not a single word. I imagined him in that perfect beige house, the blinds drawn, trying to craft a version of this story where he was still the victim. Camilla Genevieve had heard through the grapevine, had been spotted packing up her luxury SUV. No grand farewell, just a quiet, hurried retreat. It is the way of people like her. They thrive in the spotlight of admiration, but vanish the moment the mirror of accountability is turned on them. Later that afternoon, Genevieve dropped by with a box. Inside were old photo albums she had rescued from a storage unit I had once shared with Julian, a unit he had stopped paying the rent on. I hadn't asked her to do it. She just knew. We sat at my kitchen table, sifting through the ghosts of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. My wedding day. Julian as a toddler clinging to my leg with a stubborn pout. A Christmas in the mountains where the power went out and we lit the whole cabin with candles. I looked at the smiling woman in the photographs, that younger version of myself, not with bitterness, but with a gentle, compassionate distance. She had believed that love and loyalty were unbreakable forces. She wasn't wrong to hope, she was simply unprepared for a world where those things could be treated as commodities. That evening, I made a decision. I called the new community center and booked their main hall. I would host a gathering, not a gala, but a quiet celebration for the foundation's partners and beneficiaries. A circle of resilience. The local news had picked up the court story. Elderly widow wins legal battle against grasping son. The headlines were salacious and simple, but they missed the point. The real story wasn't about the battle. It was about what happens when society assumes your years have rendered you weak, when they forget that age does not dull you. It sharpens you. I visited the foundation's new office space. It was a modest but bright storefront downtown. Volunteers were painting the walls a soft sage green. A young woman named Liana, who had moved across the country to run our rural support program, threw her arms around me the moment I walked in. "You saved this place, Adelaide," she'd said, her eyes shining. I smiled, but I knew the truth. I hadn't saved it. I had simply refused to let it be stolen. Back home by the window overlooking the sea, I wrote a letter. Not to Julian, not to the court, but to myself. It began with the words, "I did not break." And it ended with, "And I will not be erased." Because that is what this entire ordeal had been about. An attempt to write over my life, to edit my final chapters with their own selfish narrative. But I had held the pen. I had stayed. 3 weeks after the verdict, I stood on a small stage at the community center, holding a microphone in a hand that no longer trembled. The room was filled with nearly 100 faces. The women from the literacy workshops, the families who had received aid, the volunteers, the board members. The air hummed with a quiet strength. I hadn't prepared a speech. I just told them the truth. This foundation, I said, my voice steady, was never about money. It was about refusing to be invisible. It was about proving that the second half of a life can be just as powerful, just as meaningful as the first. Perhaps even more so. After the event, a woman I didn't know pressed a folded note into my hand. I opened it later. It read, "Because of you, I found the courage to leave." I tucked the note away, a precious reminder of the ripples we create. Julian's lawyer eventually sent a package, a signed settlement releasing all future claims. No letter of apology, no explanation. He had chosen the silence of shame over the difficult work of redemption. I accepted it, not because I forgave him, but because I no longer required anything from him. The next morning, I donated the last of his childhood keepsakes. Some things are not meant to be stored. They are meant to be released. That afternoon, I planted 3 new apple saplings at the edge of the community garden. I do not know if I will live to see them bear fruit. But planting something you may never harvest is the ultimate act of faith. It is a belief not in yourself, but in the future. As I stood there watching the wind move through the fragile leaves, I realized I had not simply survived. I had rebuilt. I had redefined my life on my own terms. I had stayed whole. If you have ever felt dismissed, erased, or underestimated because of your age, your gender, your quiet nature, know this. The power to rewrite your own story has been inside you all along. You just have to be brave enough to pick up the pen. For legal reasons, and to protect the privacy of those involved, all names and locations in this story have been changed. I truly wonder if you were in my shoes. What would you do? Would you choose silence to maintain the peace? Or would you dare to face everything to regain your voice? I want to know your opinion, because every story can become a candle that lights the way for someone else. For now, on the final screen, I'll leave 2 of the channel's most beloved stories. I'm sure they will surprise you. Thank you for staying with me until this moment.